So Dougal, 100% agree with what you were saying around, there's people involved in this. You can't forget people. But there's an interesting debate around whether organizations should focus on the work or the worker. And it comes into what Georgina's spoken about really, really well before in terms of understanding capability and capacity. Dougal, first of all, for you, what's your view on this kind of conundrum in terms of how organizations address work-led or worker-led?
Well, I'm going to cop out really here, Johnny, and say both, right? I mean, because of course it is.
I knew it.
Yeah. I mean, I think, do you know what? I think maybe, when I was stood back a little bit and looking at the workforce like pawns on a chess set, yeah, I'd be probably saying, with more of a procurement mindset, I think it's fair to say, I'd be saying, I'd be thinking about the work. But I think increasingly I realize that you can't divorce yourself from the worker, yeah, and ultimately, I think it was you that said, Johnny, ultimately the only way that you're going to be able to deliver your projects if you're attractive for people to come and work with you, yeah, offer them good experiences in a purposeful way, and they'll find out, right? They'll find out if that's not genuine, and I think that's the same. And whether it's as and I think, as you said, whether it's your permanent employees, and by the way, Georgina, I love this idea that you have around, your own workforce being a flexible, changeable workforce. Yeah. And I think that's an intelligent company should be thinking about how they do that and enable their own workforce to be able to respond to the changing needs of the business, but all the supply chain, right? You want the supply chain to be attracted to you, and their workers ultimately often, they're most, if they're an important supplier to you, a lot of their time will be spent working with you. So I don't think you can divorce yourself from the worker. If you do, then I don't think you'll win.
Yeah, very, very good points. I think, when you look at the sort of analytical side of it, that feels like the exercise that Co-op have undertaken, and then you bring the people element into it. But Georgina, just in terms of that subject around whether you should be looking at what it is that needs to be done, how it needs to be done, or addressing it from a we want to use this kind of worker type, what's your view on that?
So I'll cop out again and say I think it's both. And for me, I use this term all the time. I'm really boring. I bore my team. Context is everything. So if we really are looking to do a short, sharp piece of work, that's impactful in some ways, but maybe not hugely visible, then actually focus on the most cost-efficient way of getting that work done. But actually, if we're looking to engage support on an area where we haven't been before, we haven't got our own internal skill and capability, and we actually need a knowledge build, then actually you probably would focus a little bit more on the worker, because of course you're buying expertise in one sense of the word. And I am really personally passionate about the fact that people do their best work when they are engaged, inspired, clear about what they're there to achieve. They're working to a common goal or a common outcome, and they're actually doing stuff that that they enjoy, that they're doing more than just their job. So one of the things that my team are working on at the moment is sounds a basic term, but career conversations. So having conversations with your colleagues about what does 5 years look like for you personally and professionally? What are the things that make you tick? Why do you get out of bed in the morning? And how could that potentially relate to the work that you're doing now and the work that relates to what you might want to do in the future? And how can we give you exposure to potentially new areas that interest you and maybe excite you? Not as easy when you're operating with a service provider or a contingent worker who's outside aisle 35, for example, but you still want them to be engaged and passionate about the work that they're doing in order to do their best job. And likelihood is you might want to re-engage them again. So not on a continuum, of course, naturally, but you might want to re-engage them for their particular expertise or their knowledge. So it's really important when you are buying any kind of service that has a person at the end of it, you've got to be really mindful that you are relying on their ability to do a good job for you.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
Johnny, I don't want to date your show too much, right? But maybe P&O are a good example of us or an organisation that maybe focused a bit too much on the work, and not enough on the worker. And maybe that's we get a good example of how that might come back to bite a company.
I think with their example, for me, it's financial decisions that look good in theory but don't actually match up in reality. That my own personal take on it from the fairly scant information that I've taken in about it. I think when you look at the work versus worker thing, one of the problems that can exist in that work versus worker discussion is if people are trying to make things fit into trying to make some work fit into a worker type, that's when you end up with misclassification. That's when you end up with people going down a route because it means, well, I've got a headcount freeze on, so I'm just going to use this, and this is the only route that I've got. Or I'm just going to stick it all under a statement of work because actually I can raise a purchase order for that and there's no limit on it. And if it's under 100K, procurement aren't worried about it. So I think it comes back round to really what you two have done and what Georgina's taking forward. If you've nailed the compliance side at the back of it, at the base, you built this foundation of a compliance based approach where you clearly defined how all the different mechanisms need to work, then you can really layer on and start making the proper business decisions. And actually it can be, you can then really bring in that consideration of the wider issues of the people, how they're going to be working, what that means to the person that's at the end of that service. So for P&O, from their point of view, what difference is there in a well-loved employee who's really bought into the company and been there and absorbed the ethos, their interaction with a passenger versus somebody who's coming in as a contractor on a short term, for example. All of these considerations can start to be put into place. But if you haven't got that baseline understanding of the definitions and everything like that, I think it becomes a lot harder, and you're still then stuck in the mud of dealing with all the misclassification and everything like that. So you can't really get sophisticated.
That's a constant battle. A number of workers are very clear about the way they want to operate, and that can be really difficult if you know that particular person has the real expertise or skills capability that you need. That can be a challenge. And for me, it's about, having an open and transparent conversation that says, fine, if this is the way that we want to engage, these are the rules that control the fun effectively. This, if you want to engage on this basis, this is what needs to be true. But if actually it doesn't feel like that's going to work for you practically or pragmatically, there could be another solution. So we are very heavily influenced by workers' preference, and that will continue to be a battle forevermore. Whether we've nailed the definitions or not, that will continue to be a battle. And equally, whether it's worker preference or whether it's supplier preference from some of our buyers, that's something that continues to be a hurdle and we need to get over. So that's why the engagement with the supplier is really critical, so they understand what we're doing to try and make sure that things are really easy to navigate. We have the appropriate mechanisms and contracts in place to make sure that our ways of working are clear and that the obligations for either party are equally clear and well understood.